Good afternoon, everyone in GLP chat, and to all of you downloading this on iTunes. Welcome to GLP's The Raw Feed. Today is Wednesday, August 24th, 2011. This afternoon's guest on The Raw Feed is John Lash. John is a self-educated freelance scholar who combines studies and experimental mysticism to teach directive mythology. That is, the application of myth to life rather than its mere interpretation. He is a leading exponent of the power of myth to direct individual experience and drive historical events over the long term. An expert on sidereal mythology, naked eye astronomy, precession, and the world's ages, he also teaches the critique of belief systems. You can find out more about Mr. John Lash at metahistory.org.
Hey, John, thank you so much for joining us here today on GLP. We've really been looking forward to this. I know it's late where you're at out there, so thanks again for coming out. The first question I wanted to ask you, I think it's pretty important, is about Gnosticism. What is your definition of Gnosticism?
Well, my definition of Gnosticism is very simple. It consists of two parts, you could say. One is an exact definition of the word, and then the second is the background of that word. And I think that with this word in particular, it's very important to keep the background in mind. So it comes from the word Gnostic Codes, which means someone who knows, a knower, or someone who has a superior or exceptional knowledge. That's the connotation. So you could spin that in many ways. You could say an enlightened person, a specialist in certain matters of the cosmos or of physics or of mysticism. So that's what the term means, literally. And the background of that term is to be seen in where the Gnostics came from. Who were the Gnostics of the European and Mediterranean classical world? Well, they were people who were the founders and directors of the so-called mystery schools. And these mystery schools were institutions of spiritual learning and practice that had existed for many thousands of years coming up into the Christian era. And so there is, behind the word Gnosticism and Gnostic, there is a long, long tradition of indigenous mystical and shamanic practice. And in one respect, I would consider that we could put the word Gnostic and Gnosticism on the very same level of antiquity and depth as you might say put Advaita Vedanta or Hindu yoga, those sort of things. We know that those ancient Asian practices have a very, very deep root, don't we? Well, likewise, the Gnostics were the classical representatives in the pre-Christian era of Europe of a very long tradition of experimental shamanism and mysticism.
And the Nag Hammadi texts that were found in Egypt in 1945, why is that such an important find, and what impact do you think that's going to have now that it's starting to become more mainstream? And if you would, please explain to us what exactly the Nag Hammadi treaties are, because I don't think everybody knows exactly what they're in reference to.
Great question there. I'd love to do that. First of all, I'll tell you what they are. The Nag Hammadi Codices are books, bound books. They're written on papyrus leaves and they're bound in leather. And actually, they're the earliest surviving examples of bound books that we have. They come from the era of about 300 AD, and at that time, most things were written in scrolls or rolls of paper or parchments, but not bound parchments. So they were found, these are 13 of these books, codex is the Latin word for book, were found in Egypt, buried in a cave in December of 1945. And they are written in Coptic, which is a very bizarre language. I don't even really consider it to be actually a legitimate language. It's more like a kind of a shorthand or a stenographic language. And they're a jumble of materials, very contradictory, very mixed, incoherent, with a lot of gaps in them and a lot of obscure passages. But these Nag Hammadi texts are extremely important. And the reason why is because they are the only surviving evidence that we have of what the Gnostics, the Gnostikoi, actually taught in the mystery schools. And one could do well to ask this question when you approach the Nag Hammadi material, why is this the only thing we have? Why do we only have, purely by chance, these 13 books, which are probably not even written down by Gnostic masters? I strongly believe, and I've looked at this question for quite a while, I'm not infallible, but this is my educated guess, that they are actually kind of class notes. So just imagine if all of the books that had been stored in Harvard University, in the library of Harvard University, were lost. And the only thing you had left to know what had been taught in Harvard University over many centuries were a collection of student notes. That would be one hell of a situation, wouldn't it? And that, in a sense, is the situation that we're looking at with the Nag Hammadi materials. So you have to ask yourself the question, why is this the only thing we have? Well, the reason is because the Gnostics, those who know, must have known something that somebody didn't want the rest of us to know. Because there was a centuries-long campaign, and you can read about it in the history books, I'm not making this up, from about 150 AD well into the Middle Ages. I'm talking a centuries-long campaign to eradicate every single piece of evidence of what was written and taught in the mystery schools. And the outpouring of the mystery schools of pagan Europe and the Mediterranean, of the Levant and Egypt, was immense, immense. We know about the Alexandrian Library, right? Everyone has heard of that, right?
Yes.
It's the most famous of the libraries and probably the most well-known one. What you have to understand that the Alexandrian Library was a library attached to a campus and university, just like the library at Harvard or Stanford or any university is attached to the campus and the teaching schools. But there were other campuses of the mystery schools and other libraries all around the Mediterranean basin and in Greece and elsewhere. They were all systematically destroyed. Well, the Gnostics, if they lived up to their name of those who know, they really must have known something that somebody didn't want to survive. And this is something that makes them extremely interesting. And so you ask about the impact. Well, I can tell you, I was born in a year the Nag Hammadi texts were discovered, possibly in the same week, because I was born December 1945, and that's when they were discovered, indeed. So I've been alive on this earth just as long as they have been here, known to the world. And in my lifetime, especially in the last 10 years, I'm beginning to see the impact of this material. It is absolutely enormous. Even though this is only a flake, a tiny flake of the knowledge and sacred instruction of the mysteries, it is so pure, so powerful, and so profound. It goes so deeply to the purpose of human life, and it answers the riddles of our life and shows us the way to realize the potential of the anthropos, or humanity, that there is no question that the growing impact of this material can be enormous and is beginning to show itself.
And is that why you believe that so many people that are ignorant towards, Gnosticism and paganism, is that why you feel that they think it's something evil because they've been misinformed by, let's say the powers that be, so they can keep the information for themselves?
Well, there was never a greater campaign of disinformation than one that was the Gnostics were subjected to.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there was an enormous campaign of disinformation, and it continues today. I'm the only Gnostic scholar who has restored this material from the viewpoint of the people who wrote it, because Gnosticism, it falls into the hands of professors in universities and experts, as it were, in the field of religion and the history of religion, such as Karen King and Elaine Pagels, to name two women scholars, prominent Gnostic scholars. Well, Karen King and Elaine Pagels are both devout Christians, and it is not within the scope of their capacity to fairly represent this material, which is not Christian. It is pagan, pre-Christian, and in many respects anti-Christian. So the Gnostic material is surrounded by a very, very wicked spin and a lot of disinformation. And I duly I have intended in all my work to clear up that fog of disinformation and present it in its true light.
Yeah, and also one of the big outlines or one of the big subjects in the Nag Hammadi treaties are the archons. Not a lot of people are familiar with the archons, and I was hoping you could get into detail with what your interpretation is of these amazing creatures, or beings, I'm sorry.
Yeah, creatures, you could call them creatures. They're not organic creatures. They're more like cyborg entities. Well, you know, there are several treasures, I would call them treasures of humanity, treasures that belong to the birthright of humanity, of the human race, that were preserved and taught in the mysteries. And the central treasure, the centerpiece of it all, is the Sophianic myth, which is the only sole unique planetary myth that we have in this world, complete and coherent planetary myth. There is no other. May sound like an outrageous statement, but I can stand by it and back it up. So I restored this myth of the divine Sophia. It's a story of how the earth came to be. It's the story of how humanity was created. And it's not just another myth about humanity or another story, but it's a completely unique one. It starts in the galactic center, and it explains that the human genome was engineered in the galactic center by divine beings called aeons, who should not be pictured as anthropomorphic. They do not have a human form or any creaturely form. They don't have an angelic form. And this great story, which I teach, the Sophianic vision story, contains an episode in it about these entities called archons. Now, I want to stress, I'll be happy always to explain the archons to the best of my ability and to give you the Gnostic background, which is absolutely a brilliant diagnosis of extraterrestrial intrusion. But I want to qualify in the beginning by saying that the archons, the presence of the archons in our world is an important thing to understand, but it's only a subplot of the whole Sophianic myth. So the entire Sophianic myth is tremendously important to us. And the archons are an important chapter in that myth, but they are not the whole of the story. So I sometimes am a little wary when too much attention goes to the archons and people don't step back and see the entire story. And the point of the story is that we, humanity, are deeply involved with the wisdom goddess Sophia. And it is our connection to Sophia and our interactivity with her that is the point of this myth. And the practice, we practice the myth by interactivity with the wisdom goddess who is Gaia, who is the living planet. And in doing so, we deal with these archon beings. Basically, they're mind parasites, and they are described in no uncertain terms in the Gnostic materials. In fact, I estimate that about 1/4, maybe even a little more, of all the surviving Coptic writings in Nag Hammadi deal with the problem of the archons. So basically, for those who don't know about these entities so far, I'll just give you the simple profile of them. Give you the simple facts as the Gnostics themselves taught. This is not my invention, by the way. This is a faithful rendition of what is found in the Gnostic materials. The archons are a cyborg-like species that was produced before the Earth came into being, and they inhabit the solar system, but not the Earth. They are, as it were, kind of a locust-like species that came about by a very strange anomaly that happened in the cosmic order prior to the Earth being formed and prior to humanity appearing on the Earth. They actually are sort of the engineers in a way and the inhabitants of the inorganic part of our solar system. See, Gnosticism taught, the teachers of the mysteries, I should say, the seers of the mysteries, taught that the Earth does not really belong to the solar system. Have you ever heard that idea before?
I have, and I was also wondering where it says in the Nag Hammadi that the archons are reptilian-like looking or gray-like.
It says this in a number of texts. Now, I want to warn you that it does not elaborate on that very much, but I have specified very clearly, if you go to the Gnostic materials on metahistory.org, I have specified the language that was used. And there is a Coptic word. Well, first of all, there is a Greek word, drakon, D-R-A-K-O-N. This is the exact language in the Nag Hammadi. I want to point out, by the way, that Coptic is a made-up language, and just about 1 in every 4 Coptic words is actually a Greek word. So the Greek word drakon, D-R-A-K-O-N, is used to describe the overlord type of the archon species. Apparently, the archon species has 2 types, a master or overlord type and a drone type. The drone type is described by a very weird metaphor, a comparison to an aborted fetus. And the word for aborted fetus is huhe, which is a Coptic word. It's a very weird word. Another way that you can interpret that is a prematurely born person. When someone is aborted, but you can have an abortion of a prematurely born person. And so that, I translate that to mean a neonate form. That is to say, what does a not fully developed human being look like? What does a human fetus look like? It has a big head and spindly limbs. And so the neonate form that the Gnostics described would appear to correspond to the ET Greys, and the draconic would appear to correspond to the reptilians. So it's absolutely remarkable that we would find a description of these entities in this material, which is almost 2,000 years old, and which dates from a tradition that is many thousands of years older. But then on the other hand, it's not really remarkable if you know who the Gnostics were, that they were accomplished seers and shamans, like Carlos Castaneda and his crew, who could perceive the Nahual, who could investigate the supernatural, and as such they were parapsychologists and experts in the paranormal. So if you understand them and if you give them that respect, you would see that it's not surprising that they had detected these parasitical entities.
Well, I find it just amazing that it also correlates to a lot of the theories out there now as well, that the draconians are the master archetypes, and the greys are their robot minions. They're basically a biological Borg with the artificial intelligence and the machine that it's talked about. And another thing that I was going to ask you about is in the secret book of John, in the Nag Hammadi treatise, it talks about Yaldabaoth and the first archon, and how Yaldabaoth breathed the spirit of Mother Sophia into Adam, and that is actually what created Adam and his spirit. But Adam was designed by angels and demons, and then when they did breathe the spirit into Adam, they got jealous because they found out Adam was able to. He was a brighter being than they were. He was able to understand better than they were, and that's why they imprisoned humanity and also made us forget what our real abilities are. Could you go into detail on that? I'm sure you know about that a lot better than I do.
Sure. This is part of the story of the Sophianic myth, and this is it's very good. Your paraphrase is quite accurate, actually.
Thank you.
The archons, I see you've studied it well. The archons are jealous of humanity. This is a very important piece of information that we get from the ancient seers. They're envious of us. And a number of texts, including the Apocryphon of John, the secret book of John, and others, point out that when the archons saw the emergence of humanity, which is called the anthropos, this sentient species, which is also called this luminous child, the term the luminous child is used to describe humanity. When they saw this luminous child, which was an experimental projection of the divine intelligence of the galactic core, they were very jealous because they are just drones and clones. They have no intentionality as human beings do. They do not have the capacity for empathy as human beings do. They have a kind of life, but they're inorganic entities of the kind that Carlos Castaneda described. They're inorganic entities, and so they try to meddle in human evolution, basically. And a big part of the Sophianic myth is how humanity can connect itself. It's a challenge, really. It's a dare. The myth is kind of a dare. That's why I'm calling it lately Wisdom's Dare. The myth says that humanity is in a situation placed between the true gods, who are our creators, if you want to use that term, and these gods are called the aeons of the pleroma, the aeons of the galactic core. The human race was not created by some other ET civilization or some other race living on another planet. It was created and generated out of the galactic core. And we have a capacities of genius, empathy, imagination, ingenuity, discovery, metanoia, the ability to think in paradigms, the ability to construct and invent and discover. We have these fantastic qualities that are envied by these inorganic beings who inhabit the solar system, but not the Earth. And so there's an ongoing drama. We are placed between the archons, who are intrusive mind parasites, and the true gods of the pleroma. And our fate as a species depends on connecting with our origin, that is, with the true gods, and breaking through the illusions and trickery of the archons. They have created a matrix. They did not create the material world, by the way. That is something that you will sometimes read in Gnostic books or books about Gnosticism. It's a completely wrong view of what the Gnostics taught. It's also a serious piece of information or disinformation. The archons did not create humanity. They did not create the Earth, but they did create a matrix of illusion into which we can get trapped. So even though we are living on a beautiful paradisical planet where everything is provided for us to proceed with an experiment of love and invention, we have the capacity in our minds to be trapped in the archonic matrix. And this is the test that humanity faces. And the way to beat that test, to master that test, is to unite with the goddess Sophia, who is in fact embodied in the Earth itself. It's due to her that the archons came into the picture in the first place, due to a kind of error that she made, you could call it. And it is through her that we can overcome the archons.
Well, that's another thing I wanted to talk about, too. I know you firmly believe that the Sumerian clay tablets that Zechariah Sitchin had translated are basically a con to fool us into believing that they created us to turn our power over to them. And I just I was wondering if you could explain that, because I think that up until I had heard you talk about that, I was a firm believer of that possibility. But I'd like to get your take on it.
Sure. It's a really important point, you know. There are many people in recent years, since Sitchin started writing, and also other people like David Icke have picked this up. Many people have become convinced that the Sumerian Anunnaki script is true. Now, first of all, I want to point out that just because something was written on clay tablets in Sumeria 3,000 or 4,000 years ago doesn't mean it's true any more than what's written in the Wall Street Journal. So be careful of that. But secondarily, let's look at what is the content of that story. The content of that story is not what the archons actually did. It's what they would like us to think that they did. Because the nature of the archons is to trick us into giving away our power, exactly as you said. And they cannot, be our makers and take the stand that they are our makers and control us unless we give them that, unless we say that they are. And so that is why that program, that con, was introduced. Now, that con, that disinformation of the Sumerian text might completely pass unnoticed. It might pass without critical scrutiny. And unfortunately, I have to say, it has passed without critical scrutiny. A lot of people just hear it, and they just swallow it hook, line, sinker. I can understand why they do. Because when you look at the state of the world today, and when you look at the state of human society and of politics and religion, you can see that we are in some kind of deep trouble, and that we are on the verge of falling into an enslavement. I agree that there are many things in the behavior of people in the world today that make it look like we are a slave species and that we were created to be slaves. But I warn you to be very, very careful about accepting that story. Because if you accept that story, what's going to be the outcome? If you think that you are a slave species, what's going to be the outcome of that belief system? Now, the Gnostic materials contain, and I've pointed this out explicitly, the Gnostic materials contain 2 or 3 passages which pointedly argue against the Sumerian Anunnaki thesis. One of them, for instance, is about the so-called rape of Eve. Now, the rape of Eve, mythologically, would be the archons wanted to rape Eve. Okay, what does this mean? Mythologically, it means that the archons wanted to perform an interbreeding experiment with the human genome. Okay? Is that clear?
Right. Yeah, I remember reading that.
Right. Many people would say, oh, well, they have, and here's the proof. First of all, there is no proof, and you cannot prove it. You cannot prove that any ETs have meddled with the human genome scientifically, unless you have an untampered sample of the genome to compare to the tampered sample. And I don't believe anybody's come up with that. So while it is tempting to believe that someone has meddled, how could we be in such a fucking mess? How could we be so deluded? How could we be so lost and at each other's throats? How could it have come to such a sad pass with the human race if we weren't seriously deviated? Well, we have been seriously deviated, but only through the trickery of the mind of the archons. They have not, in fact, succeeded in hacking the human genome. At least according to the Gnostic seers, they were not able to do it. Now, maybe you don't believe the Gnostic seers and you don't take their word as having any value, but I do, because they come from a very long tradition of shamanism, and they would have known. So they deconstructed, in a certain sense. In some of the Gnostic texts, such as on the origin of the world and the Apocrypha of John, you actually find passages that refer to the Anunnaki scenario, and they refute the claim that we have been genetically altered. We haven't been genetically altered. We have been mind-fucked. It's not the same thing. But we have been mind-fucked into believing that we're genetically altered. And if we believe that, where does the script go from there? Let me ask you, where are you going to take it from there?
And you also talk a lot about the differences between the reptilian and the serpentine powers. What is the difference between the two?
Difference between the reptilian and the serpentine powers is the difference between fear and ecstasy. It's the difference between manipulation and teaching. It's the difference between control and empathy. We do have a certain reptilian element in our human makeup, which is the R complex in the back brain, sometimes called the reptilian brain. We need that brain because we are animals living in a on a planet where there are predators. And although the other animals are not natural, we are not the natural prey to any animal. But other animals can prey on us in certain situations and have done so in the past. So we needed the reptilian brain in order to have the fight or flight instinct. But the reptilian brain is only a tiny part of our makeup, of our physiological and spiritual makeup. It's a tiny circuit that we use when we need to protect ourselves or defend ourselves. When that circuit gets overpumped and fed by fear and fed by threats, that circuit begins to take on an inordinate role in our lives, and we are run by fear, and we, in a sense, become both reptilian-like in our behavior, and we become the prey to reptilian-like entities. We also have in our makeup a much more powerful circuit, and that is the circuit of the serpent energy of Kundalini. And I've shown, for instance, in my analysis of the Gospel of Philip, which is one of the longer and more esoteric, probably the longest and most esoteric text on esoteric practices in the Nag Hammadi writings. The Gospel of Philip says explicitly that we use the power of Kundalini, we use this power of ecstasy, of the serpent power that is in your body, connecting you to the earth. It's the electricity, it's the erotic and magical electricity of the planet in your body. And that is what we use in order to ward off these reptilian and archonic forces. It actually is an immune force. The Gnostics used to have a practice in which they raised Kundalini by trance, by dance, by drumming, by chanting, by sexual practices, and by the use of entheogenic plants. They were masters in all these techniques. And what I'm talking about is not going to be a mystery to a lot of people listening here, because many of us know these techniques and have used them today. I'm talking about people who were past masters of these techniques of trance and ecstasy. And they talk about raising the Kundalini in order to put yourself in a cocoon of light, which they call the nymphion. Scholars translate it as bridal chamber, nymphion. But the nymphion was actually a cocoon or bubble of light. It was like the luminous egg. It was the luminous egg of which Castaneda speaks. And when you're in this luminous egg, and your vital force is high, and your sexuality is high and clean and free, and is a beautiful pitch of sexual and vital energy, there is nothing that the archonic or reptilian forces can do to you. And so we are given the serpent power. Serpent power is a power of wisdom, compassion, and magic, and should not ever be confused with the reptilian circuit, which is a tiny survival circuit built into the human organism.
And do you think that's why the typical Christian version of the serpent in Genesis is looked at as something evil, because they wanted to keep that, once again, that type of information for themselves?
Well, I don't know if they had that kind of information, but maybe that's true. And the Gnostic version of the serpent in the Garden of Eden is completely different. You know
right.
that. It
right.
tells a story just the other way around. The serpent is not the tempter. The serpent is the instructor of Eve.
Right, and that's why it would make one think that would read the Christian version of Genesis when it talks about the serpent being the devil and talking Eve into eating the fruit of knowledge, which is supposed to be evil. It certainly makes you think. And another thing that I found fascinating when I first heard you a few months ago that just blew me away was the Sari insects and how they basically were formed out of thin air with frequencies and crystals. Could you tell us about that? I think that's an amazing subject.
Sure, I'd love to point that out because it is astounding. But before that, I want to just say one more thing about the serpent in the Garden of Eden. You know, Christians and people today who are trying to understand what's going on in the world have a terrible tendency, which they've had ever since the foundation of their religion, and that is a tendency to project. So whatever they cannot handle in their own psyches, in their own bodies, and especially their own sexual energy, they project it and they make it diabolical. They make it into something diabolical outside themselves. And they're afraid of the serpent power, and they're afraid of the wisdom and bliss that comes through the serpent power. And yes, indeed, it probably was an entheogenic plant. That was the apple in the Garden of Eden. It probably was an entheogenic plant that the serpent gave to Eve, our mother, because very, very early in the history of our species on this planet, we discovered the entheogenic plants, and we discovered how to open our eyes to the divine worlds and how to teach us and heal us. And these plants are a tremendous part of our history as a species and absolutely essential to our survival. And the Gnostics, seers of the mysteries, knew how to use these plants. They were masters of entheogenic shamanism. And so Christians, unfortunately, and I am disgusted when I hear Christians and people in general on the internet use the word pagan. They don't have any idea what pagan means. They don't have the faintest idea what it means. And they equate it with Satanism, and this is absolutely ridiculous. And so I warn people to be very, if you don't know already, to be very wary of that kind of talk. Anyway, get back to your second question, getting back to the archons. So how were the archons created? Well, there's a huge difference between the way that humanity was emanated. You see, in Gnostic myth, they don't really say that humanity was created. We weren't really created like a potter creates a pot. This is like the Old Testament idea of creation. Jehovah, the Father God, creates humanity out of clay, and we are created like a potter creates a pot. In the mystery school teachings, this is not the case. We're not created at all. We're emanated. And this is called immanent theory, the theory of immanence, not the theory of creation. We are emanated. We are like creatures in a dream. We are now in the dream of divine beings. We are characters in the dream of divine beings. They have emanated us. But their power of emanation is so fantastic, proceeding from the galactic core, that they can actually materialize what they're emanating. So just imagine that you could dream, when you go to bed at night and you dream, and you say you dream of a cat, and then you wake up in the morning and you think, well, that was interesting. I dreamt that I was sitting in a chair and a cat was on my lap. But imagine that in your dream you could materialize the cat. That is what the gods can do. That is the power of the gods, to materialize their dreaming. So we are the materialized dreaming of the gods, originating in the pleroma center. But the archons are completely different. Because the myth says that when Sophia plunged from the galactic center, because she was so fascinated with humanity, she wanted to be involved in an experiment with us, that the force of her energy, of her plasmic stellar energy, impacted the spiral arms of the galaxy. It impacted a certain region. I want you to imagine it as if you had a massive ball dropped into a swirling river. And if that massive ball dropped into that river, would momentarily create a fracture and a huge splash and a fracture zone. And in that fracture zone of inorganic matter, the archons arose. Now, this is what the myth says, and I faithfully translated this when I wrote my book and when I started to write about the Gnostic myth. But I have to tell you honestly, I was like saying, this is pretty weird. I don't get this, and I don't know how anybody's going to believe this. Anyway, I do believe the myth is correct. It's not a made-up story. It's a genuine report of something happened. And then I found out about this experiment of the Akari insects, which was performed around 1820 by a young English scientist and was repeated by the famous scientist Michael Faraday. And to make a long story short, you can look it up on the internet, the abiogenesis of Akari insects, A-C-A-R-I. And abiogenesis means the production of something alive from non-living. So what he did was he he exerted a magnetic field, a mild magnetic field, on some kind of mineral or crystallized substrate, and it produced mites. Mites, like lice, out of this action. And of course, they are not organic beings. They're more like insects, and that's what the archons are like. So I found a remarkable confirmation of the mystery school teaching in this experiment, which is absolutely astonishing to read about.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I was also curious about the Zadokites. I know you went into pretty good detail about them, and I think that's something that's really important that we should discuss, because if you look at the correlations then and now with their rules of thumb, I think you know a lot more about this than I do, and I wanted to get your interpretation on them. Could you tell our audience about the Zadokite?
Yeah, I would love to. It's a subject that is so, so crucial to saving humanity and to bringing us through to life on this planet, what I call the divine experiment. You know, it's a big term. I've been using it lately. I want to say, what does John Lash mean when he's talking about the divine experiment? Well, I just want to say, in one sense, it does mean that we make the connection to the divinity of the earth, and we become interactive with the living earth and with the divine Sophia. And that is possible. That is happening right now. But it also means let's just get along with each other and have a great time, you know. Why can't we do this? You know, why can't we just get along on this planet and enjoy each other and have a good time, maybe disagree once in a while. Maybe we might have a few fights or conflicts now and then, but why is the whole world engulfed in deceit and conflict and manipulation and hoaxes? You know, why? Well, when I wrote Not in His Image, I had a big challenge on my plate. First of all, I wanted to give the world back what it had lost, to bring back the Sophianic myth of the mysteries, which is the myth to guide our species. And that is the solution. I'm into solution. And the solution is in the Sophianic myth and in the practices of telestic shamanism, which come from the mysteries. I believe that. But at the same time, I had to talk about the problem. And the problem is the Zadokim. And so I devoted the first 6 chapters of my book to a very tight analysis and presentation of material that took me many, many years of my life to work through and much study. And what I discovered was that the archonic virus, the archons are parasites, these cyborg-like parasites that want to live in our reality, but they can't, but they want to. And the best chance that they have to live in it is to take over our minds and to make us become like them. And so you can speak of a kind of archonic mind virus. And if you want to understand the problem on this planet, go back to the tap root. You have to go back to the moment when that archonic mind virus infected us originally, and where and how it infected us. It had to have what's called a vector. You know? Any disease, any epidemic that is going to spread has to have a vector. It has to have one person or a group of people into which it enters first, and then it spreads to other people. And so I identified what the vector of the archonic parasites, mind parasites, is. And that was a sect, a tiny sect in the ancient Jewish religion. It wasn't ancient Jewish religion as a whole. It wasn't mainstream Judaic religion. It was a tiny, tiny splinter sect called the Zadokim, which means the perfected ones or the righteous. And through the Zadokim came the ideology of salvation, retribution, and basically this, and get this, folks, the master race ideology. You see, the problem we have on this planet is many, many aspects. But if you want to boil it down and distill it to its essence, it is due to a master race ideology. The reason why we can't go on and all get along and have a good time is because somebody doesn't want us to. If we were left to our own devices, we could do it. Sure, we would have problems. It wouldn't be a perfect world, but we could get along and we could have a fantastic time, enjoy each other, learn, love, play, teach. Why can't we do this? Why are we having such a hard time? It's because someone doesn't want us to do it. And that group of people are infected with a master race ideology. And so the Zadokine were the sect. They were the ones that left a record of their ideology and beliefs in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So don't confuse the Dead Sea Scrolls with the Nag Hammadi material. Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in Jerusalem, near Jerusalem, in 1947, about 18 months after the Nag Hammadi. And they contain the record of the Zadokine sect, which were called Zealots. And they were terrorists, and they had a genocidal and geocidal view that they were the master race, they were the seed of the master race, and they were going to prevail and destroy the whole world and then claim it back as their own kingdom. And they're still trying. In fact, they're in the end game right now, and that's why it's so bad. This is the end game of the Vatican. We're looking it in the face.
You know, we had a guest on here a few days or a couple weeks ago, Tex Mars, and he firmly believes that the people that rule the world's resources and media are all Jewish. And with what you're saying, it certainly does correlate. Because he's not referring to the average Jewish person. He's referring to the elite Zionist agenda, and the two really correlate off of each other, and that certainly makes a lot of sense if you look at it from that point of view. Who is Hypatia? I don't think many people have heard of Hypatia, and I think she had a really big impact on Gnosticism, and it'd be a good idea for a lot of people to hear that story.
I just want to say that my book, Not in His Image, which came out 5 years ago, is my attempt as a scholar, not academic, independent scholar, but also as a practicing mystic and a shaman, someone who does shamanic practices both with and without entheogens, to restore the divine myth of Sophia, which is the myth to guide our species, and also to describe the problem. So it's a big deal to put those two things together, but I did it in my book, and the first chapter of my book begins with the murder of Hypatia. Hypatia was a pagan intellectual, Gnostic, and a teacher at the school of Alexandria. And she was murdered by a Christian mob in 415 AD. And that event, that single murder in the streets of Alexandria, was so horrendous to the people of that time. It's sort of like it was the 9/11 of that time. They knew that from that moment on, something bad was really coming down. Because 9/11 was bad enough, but it's what's come down after 9/11 that's really bad. And so the murder of Hypatia was like the 9/11. Many scholars have said that it was the end of the pagan world, the end of the world of tolerance, of the pagan intellectualism, of the aesthetics of the pagan world, which nobody knows anything about. The ethics and aesthetics of paganism were very, very high and pure and noble. And she was a symbol of all that was noble and good, and symbol of the mystery schools. And her murder was, the sign that the dominator ideology of the Zadokine, which had passed into Christianity through St. Paul, was coming down the road, and it was going to tear out and destroy and murder everything that it could not dominate. So the story of Hypatia is tremendously important. And the movie, by the way, Agora, about her, is very bad and badly done and does not represent her fairly at all. And also, she did not end in the way it shows in the movie, where she's strangled to death by her lover, which is some stupid, melodramatic script turn. She died at the hands of a Christian mob in the streets. I
was also thinking, too, about the the Nag Hammadi scriptures. There's a lot of work in those scriptures that talk about Jesus Christ and how he is the Savior, and I know your interpretation is quite a bit different from that, and I was wondering why he was referred to that way, and do you believe that he actually did walk the earth, or do you believe that it was all based on symbolism and the sun and represented the different planets and astrology and whatnot?
Well, I've said to it this, and I said, here we go, Jesus again. It's like, how many times are you going to run over that chicken and then go back and try to pick out some meat for a salad, Anyway, there are so many things that have been said about Jesus. In my book, I give the mention here that a few things that I just like to repeat that of the many things that I could say. Okay, Jesus, this is from the glossary of my book. A man alleged to have lived in the 1st century of the Common Era, variously viewed as a hippie-like faith healer, a radical rabbi, an Essene teacher, a yogi from Kashmir, a pretender to the kingship of Israel, a Zadokite terrorist, the expected Messiah of the Jews, a magician, a false guru who usurped the role of John the Baptist, a Gnostic initiate, a Jewish mystic, an extraterrestrial from Venus, and the sole incarnation of divinity in human form. Take your pick. Okay? It's like, and that's not even a full account of the things that have been said. If you want to know what I think that the most probable profile of the historical Jesus was that he was a member of the Zadokite cult and that he was a terrorist, or as we would say, freedom fighter in this radical Jewish sect that wanted to throw the Romans out of the Holy Land. They wanted to overcome the Roman occupation of the Holy Land and establish a Jewish empire. And they still do, by the way. They still do want to establish a Jewish empire on the earth. That is the goal of the Zadokite. It hasn't changed. So I don't think that Jesus was the divine Messiah. And in fact, I have to point out, we're getting into splitting hairs here, and I don't like to do that because I don't want to get into scholarly arguments. But I have argued, and I stand by this, that the name Jesus is not really ever used in the Nag Hammadi text. They use the code. And the code is 2 letters, which are Coptic letters. Now, Coptic is written in all capital letters, okay? And the way that the Coptic alphabet actually consists of Greek letters, like alpha, beta, gamma, delta. These are the letters of the Coptic alphabet with 6 additional letters added. So Coptic is just borrowed the Greek alphabet and added 6 letters. And the way that it's written, if you look at the Nag Hammadi, is it's all written in capitals. So do you find the name Jesus written in these? No, you don't. You find the word I, iota, sigma, I-S in capitals, like the word is. And this is the code for Jesus. And what scholars do is they make it I-E-O-S-U-S, Eosus. They say that it means Jesus. And then they say, well, this must be Jesus in the New Testament. This must be St. Paul. It's Jesus. This proves that the Gnostics believed in Jesus and that he was a great teacher. It proves nothing of the kind. The Gnostic materials also contain, and I would point this out, go look at my commentary on the 2nd treatise of the Great Seth. The 2nd treatise of the Great Seth from Nag Hammadi completely obliterates the idea of a resurrected Jesus, completely obliterates the idea of a divine Messiah. They call the idea of resurrection, which is so precious to Christians, the doctrine of a dead man. And they say if you don't know how to find eternal life before you die, you're never going to find it afterwards. So what's the good of resurrection? See what I mean? So it's I believe that it is not true to the materials to say that there is an argument for Jesus as the Messiah or a divine teacher or even as a Gnostic teacher in the Nag Hammadi text. The Nag Hammadi texts are essentially anti-Christian and anti-Judaic, and they should be read very carefully in that respect.
Hey, Rex, I'm going to jump in here. This is Rags, Mr. John Lash.
Yes, Rex, how you doing?
Hey, not too bad. And I'm doing great, thank you. We're all such individuals in a lot of different senses, especially out here. And, I know you teach a lot about, obviously reading through belief systems. How is it that we are obtained? I've been listening to you now for a bit here, and, some of your stuff resonates with me, but then, I may have we all have such a different set of belief systems. How do we go about trying to understand what you're talking about? I mean, obviously, if you talk to a lot of Christians, they'll kind of listen to you and say, wow, especially deep-rooted Christians will say, what's this guy talking about, How is he trying to, and how do you reach that type of an audience with how you're trying to cross-reference the different things that you're talking about?
Well, I have acted the role of scholar. I don't have degrees behind my name or anything, but I took upon myself the responsibility to delve into these materials. I studied comparative mythology all my life. I studied belief systems. But as I say I call the introduction to my book, Not in His Image, the case for awe. The case for awe. And as I point out in there, I'm making a case in my book, Not in His Image, and you can't make it as a scholar. The case that I'm making, the message that I have, is the message that the mystery school teachers had. That is to say that we have a story, one particular story, that guides our species. And that is the story of our origin, the story of the origin of the earth and of the archons, and of the nature of this divine experiment. And that this story is unique in that by practicing it and practicing interactivity with the divine Sophia, that is the living earth, we can actually live the story. What makes the story unique is that it tells us really who we are. Now you might say that the biblical story of Genesis and creation tells you who you are as well. I wouldn't argue with that. But go practice that story and see where it gets you. All I'm doing, I'm not trying to convert anyone. All I'm doing is saying, here's another story. It has a very, very deep background. I believe that the people who produced this story for us produced a truth, a profound truth. Investigate the story and see if you would like to live it and be involved in this story. This is the way that I present it. There's no arguing about beliefs. People are going to believe what they want to believe. But this story goes beyond belief. And Gnosticism is not just another religion. It's an alternative to religion. It gets us out of the trap of religion and out of the trap of dependence upon some Father God and some off-planet deity for salvation. So it's a visionary practice, and it's not everybody's cup of tea,
No, yeah, and don't get me wrong, I don't think you're trying to change it. I like what you're saying. It's just trying to, most of us when we're set with a belief system, we're trying to follow along. Most of us with our minds are set in a more of a chronological scale, so to speak. We kind of look at things of how they've been patterned to us throughout time, and then and try to build up a conclusion and with our thought processes. So when I'm trying to put this together, I'm trying to think of so I'm thinking about what you're talking about. I'm trying to put my own belief system in it, and when I'm trying to ascertain it all, I'm trying to weigh about what you're thinking about the different aspects of the mysticism that you're talking about the metaphysical history that we're talking about.
Rex, let me have a crack at this. Mr. Lash, in other words, there's a lot of predictive programming out there. So how could you reach somebody and get them to open their mind and at least listen? That's the key. Listen. They have a short attention span, and if it's not the least bit interesting, they're going to tune you out.
Yes, I know that. I know that very well. And you raised a really valid question here.
So how do you reach that type of populace?
Well, lately, I don't know who I'm reaching, really. I just count on the beauty of the story. I said something years ago when I gave a talk in the United States. I said, try to express my own personal relation to the divine Sophia, which is to say the wisdom of the earth, the living goddess who is the earth. What is my relation to her? Well, it's for me to teach and for her to reach, So she reaches people or she doesn't. I find that she reaches people through the beauty of this story. So when I talk about the Sophianic myth, when I talk about who the Gnostics and the mystery school teachers really were, there's something beautiful and noble about it. And I find that those are the qualities that resonate to certain people, and they are drawn to the story. The many people who can't listen for more than 10 seconds, the many people who are blinded by their predictive programming and their religious and scientific paradigms, I can't get to those people, and I don't even try.
Well, what's the first part that somebody would step? I mean, because see, I'm curious. So see, for me, you know, trying to expound it and for everybody here, because don't get me wrong, we have all sorts of people that we have here on the raw feed. I mean, if I can understand Stanley Cito, I can tell you what, I can understand. I gotta tell you, I could understand this too, you know, and you know, it's just that starting point for people. What do you suggest a starting point for people to try to understand about what you're talking about? That's my whole point. Where should I start to look at to really try to understand?
You could read Not in His Image. You know, Not in His Image, it's not an easy read, and a lot of people can't get through it. But some people do, and I'll tell you something I find rather remarkable. Of the people who have written me about reading Not in His Image, and the ones who get through it, they all say exactly the same thing. It's amazing, almost exactly the same words. They all say, that is the most liberating thing I ever read in my life. They all say that. It's amazing. And so you read Not in His Image to find out where the problem came from. Who is it that doesn't want us to live on this planet? Who is it that doesn't want us to have a paradise here, have a good time and enjoy each other? Who doesn't want that? And where did they come from? You can really get their profile of the predators from my book, and then you can get the vision story. The other thing is go to meta-history and listen to the talks. If you can't, doing a lot of talks lately, listen to the talks I've done on the Gaia Sophia myth, or listen to the narrations of the Gaia Sophia myth that have been recorded by different people, which are very, very beautiful. And just listen to the story. You know, the interesting thing about the story, it's a creation myth. It's the Sophia story of the mysteries. But bear in mind that somebody didn't want us to know this story, and we almost lost it. If those manuscripts hadn't been discovered, we would have lost this story. And think about how close that was. And so the story might, catch your interest simply because of the fact that there was so much effort put into destroying it. Why? Why is it so dangerous? It's dangerous because it is our story. We are storytelling creatures. We are animals that need a story to live by. And so the story that we choose is extremely important, and it will direct and guide our behavior. So all I can say is look at the story or read Not in His Image if you've got the stamina.
No, that works. So then what directly got you started in this? What was something that made you get on into this travel that you're on now and this road that you're seeking? That's what I'm trying to find out. Was there a particular book that stumbled upon the reading of the Gaia? What is it that really got you started for this?
Well, three things basically got me on this path. The first thing was that I had the good fortune to grow up as a young boy from the age of 3 in the most beautiful, pristine coastal village in Maine, a place called Friendship. I come from Friendship, Maine. It's a lobster fishing village. And in that beautiful, pristine place with the coves and the islands and the ledges and the green Atlantic water, which you couldn't keep me out of, I made my first connection with nature, and I realized how much I love nature and how I felt comfortable with nature, and I bonded with it, you could say. The second thing was that from the age of 4 also, I had a number of supernatural and mystical experiences. The most dramatic one being a vision of a witch, a lucid dream of a witch, which I describe on meta-history, or you can go find it on the site there. And that dream, at the age of 4, started me on my spiritual or mystical quest, if you will. And also, when I was 16 years old, I was still living in the small town in Maine. I had a spontaneous Kundalini experience that went on off and on, continued for about 6 months. And that was an absolutely momentous thing that was completely incomprehensible at the time, but just really shot me off onto a great adventure of seeking. And first of all, just trying to understand what it was that I didn't know were Kundalini at that time. I didn't know what it was. So that was very important. The third thing was, and I described this in the preface and not in his image, I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian community in this little town of Friendship, like a Puritan Christian community, very tight. And they were really into programming all of us children, getting us to accept Jesus as our personal Savior, to follow the Bible, and to believe that script. And I knew from the age of about 12 or so that there was something that really stunk about that whole program. And I looked at the people around me who were supposed to be models of morality and who were believers in God and who were always talking fervently about Jesus and about being saved. And I thought there was something really, really wrong with these people, And just my childish instinct, just the instinct of a kid. Kids know, man. Kids know what the truth is. The trouble is we all know what the truth is when we're kids, but the trouble is you've got to hang on to it. You've got to be a warrior to hang on to your gut and your heart tell you. And so the combination of those three things, my bond to nature, a kick-ass into the supernatural world at the age of 4 and 17, and my contempt and disgust at these people and their religious devotionalism launched me on this path.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate that. I mean, that just gives me a better perspective of where you were coming from and how you reach it. I mean, we all reach it from a different aspect. Sometimes it's, curious to us all to ascertain our speaker, where they're coming from, such as our guests themselves. I'm going to go back over to 2342 and see if he has any more questions from maybe some of our members. Rex, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm actually looking at a question right now from Nexus Editor. He's on our forums a lot, and he was asking if what your interpretation was on the invisible energy-feeding parasitic alien invader coming to Earth millennia ago, written about in the Nag Hammadi Codices.
Well, I don't know about an alien invader coming to Earth. What the Nag Hammadi Codices tell us is that there is an alien presence in the solar system. I emphasize this. And remember what I said before. One of the most startling facts of Gnostic cosmology, which I believe is being confirmed, can be confirmed through science, but through the new science, not the old delusional science, is that the Earth doesn't belong to the solar system. The Earth is an organic body captured in an inorganic planetary system. We are the proper inhabitants. The human species and other sentient creatures are the proper inhabitants of the living planet and the biosphere of the Earth. The Archons inhabit the solar system at large and probably are concentrated around the planet Saturn. Now, the Nag Hammadi text says that the Archons have this overlord, and perhaps this is what the person in the question is referring to, the alien invader. This overlord is called Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth. It's a very weird name. Yaldabaoth. No one really knows what it means. It's kind of a made-up name. Seems to be sort of Aramaic, but it appears to be the creature who flits or flies through space. And interestingly, that ties in with the flyers of Castaneda. Now, when you picture Yaldabaoth, who is Jehovah of the Old Testament, Yahweh and Jehovah, and Yaldabaoth, the reptilian overlord of the Archons, are all the same entity. What is this entity? Is it a god? No. It's not a god. It's a pseudo-god. It's an alien entity that believes that it is a god and wants us to believe it is a god and wants to rule over us and conquer us. And this is the alien, master alien parasite, Jehovah, the father god of the Abrahamic religions. needless to say, when the Gnostics came out of the mystery schools and pointed this out to the early Christians, they were not exactly received with warm embraces and kisses for pointing out that this God was a demented alien. But the Gnostic materials do not say that it ever invaded the earth. It never invaded the earth. In fact, archons can't live in the atmosphere of the earth. Have you ever wondered why they didn't show it up by now, those motherfuckers? I mean, why don't they stop threatening it? And if they're able to land and invade, why don't they? What are they waiting for? You know, the position of archons, as the Gnostics understood them, relative to the atmosphere of the earth, is rather like the position of a human being going into the deep sea. You have to have all this gear on. You have to have a helmet on. You have to go, because we're not meant to live at the bottom of the sea. That's why ETs can only appear for fleeting or sporadic incidents upon the earth. They can't stay here. So there's nothing about an invasion of the earth. It's the invasion of our minds. It's a mental invasion. The matrix is a mental construct, and we can deconstruct it by the wisdom of the earth goddess and by the innate genius of our own species. We can break the matrix of the archontic mind parasites. But they're not physically invading the planet. That is a paranoid delusion that I don't personally, it's just my belief, I don't believe that is true.
Well, let me ask you this, while we're talking about it. Have you seen the movie The Matrix?
Yeah, I sure have.
And Agent Smith, in my opinion, would make a very good Archon. And some of the lines that come out of that movie, they had some really good hidden knowledge in there. And I had an epiphany the other day, and I just wanted to bring this up here on the show. I was riding to work, and I really did feel like we're in the Matrix, because if you look at everything as a whole, it all breaks down into interpretation and perception, and even matter isn't physical. But I wanted to ask you about George Kavasilis, because a lot of what he says is correlating with what you're talking about with Saturn. He firmly believes that all the planets and the sun have their own life force, their own being, and he talked about the Saturn competing with our sun, and the rings of Saturn having something to do with tuning forks and our being, and having an impact on how we resonate with it. Do you feel that Saturn and the octagons or the hexagons in Saturn are a construct of the archons?
Well, I haven't really investigated it in depth. I do infer from certain passages, and they're very trace, a lot of what you find in the Gnostic material is just trace elements. It's not a full and elaborate description, but just traces and clues. I do infer from the Gnostic materials that Saturn is the primary domain of the archons, so there may be some kind of stress that they exert within the solar system from the Saturnian orbital sphere that works against our planet and so forth. That's how possible. I haven't investigated it, so I don't know. But what you said previous to that is really important as well, and that is that the matrix is a mental construct. Everything is perceptual and conceptual in the matrix, and yet we live on a planet that has a living power to dispel the illusions of the archonic matrix. That is the battle. There's really a battle taking place in the human mind. Are we going to see the beauty and power and wisdom of the earth, which is alive, and unite with it, which is our source, or are we going to fall into the field of vibrations, in the field of thought forms, as it were, that are projected by the archons? This is a battle that we're facing, and The Matrix was an amazing film. I wrote a review of it on Meta-History Board. It does contain some fantastic Gnostic elements, and true, Agent Smith is like an archon, but I would point out, and the Gnostics pointed this out as well, they said, Jerusalem is the dwelling place of many archons. Now, this is a direct quote from the Nag Hammadi text. How do I interpret that? I interpret that to mean not that archons have come from outside the earth and actually landed and were walking around in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, but that human beings become archontified. They were referring to archontified human beings. What is an archontified human being? You see them all the time, and we're seeing them more and more. It's somebody who will stand in front of you and represent an authority, like a police officer, who will stand in front of you and tell you that they have authority over you. And they will enforce that authority on you, whereas you can never get to the source of that authority, That is an archontic structure. In fact, the archon, the one translation of the word archon means authorities or rulers. So there are many archontified human beings in the world. There were back then and there are now. But I do not believe that there are actual archons, permanently living on the earth. It's not, at least I haven't found that to be true, and I've investigated it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to take a question now from Mega Quake. He's asking, where did the wives of Cain and Abel come from?
Well, I don't know what they mean by that. I mean, the human species emerged at a certain point very long ago, probably after the time of the Cambrian explosion, which is about 583 million years ago. It's my understanding that a certain kind of larval form of the human being emerged, and our race, the human race, was seeded on this planet. This is the way that it's done all through the galaxy. Now, there is no life of creatures at the core of a galaxy. Creatures like us and other animals, like elephants and whales, have to live on a planetary system. And the spores or seeds of the species float through space and take root in a planetary system, like a seed takes root in the womb of a woman. And so, the first people on this earth sprung up in various places on this earth, So the biblical view that there was one primal parents, Adam and Eve, is completely inaccurate. There were people springing up at different places of the earth at different times. So that's the natural evolution of our species in this world. I don't know if I've answered the question. I don't know if I understood it, but that's my best shot.
All right, thanks a lot. I was going to throw the mic back over to Phenomenon now. She has a question for you.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Lash. I'd like to touch on something you mentioned earlier, why we all can't get along. I think we have become a very restless nation, a very restless species, and that we've strayed away from the energies and the gifts that we were born into this life with. How would you suggest that, in pertain to individualism, how would you suggest one find their inner peace?
Well, I believe strongly, and I practice this belief, and other people join me if it's to their liking, that I believe that we can do something. We have been terribly alienated from our origins, I agree. We have been kind of forgotten who we were. Maybe there's a natural process of forgetting that we have to overcome. We have to go back and get back to where we came from. And there's also this terrible deviant threat in our midst that has been working on us for centuries. So how do we deal with that? How do we find peace in ourselves and get back to who we really are? Well, I believe that one way to do that, I don't believe, this is how I do it, and it works for me, is to make a pact with the earth. Now, if you were going to get along with anybody, if you're going to get married, you make a pact with your husband or wife. If you're going to start a business with someone, you make a pact with your business partner. If you're going to go to the university for 4 years and study something like botany, you make a pact with the university, with the institution of learning. So making a pact is the way that human beings confirm and commit themselves to an action, to a course of action. So I suggest we make a pact with the earth. That is to say, we actually regard the earth as if it is a living entity that we can communicate light with as if it is another person. But don't personalize it too much, but a consciousness and an awareness that we can reach. And then make a pact with it and make a commitment to it and join your life to the life of the earth. Because I've often said that one of the things that I think makes us very unhappy is this disease of narcissism. That's another big subject. You can't blame that on the archons, you know. We do have this disease of narcissism in our species, everyone for himself. And I believe it's an illusion that you have your own life. You don't have your own life. You don't have a life of your own. And I don't have the life of my own. It's the only life I have. The only way I can breathe, eat, think, is because my life, my body, is supported in every cell by the biomatrix of the earth right now. If the earth and life force and intelligence of the earth did not support me right now, I would crumble and fall right here. And so I make a pact with the source of life, and that's the way to start. And I believe that through going back to the source of life, which is not some God beyond this world, not some metaphysical make-believe fiction, but the planet is the source of our life. Make a pact with the wisdom goddess, as the pagan peoples did, as all the indigenous peoples have always done. And that's the way back to serenity, and that's also the way ahead to magic, to power.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to you, 23.
All right. Hey, I've got a question from Hub Nuts.
Did you just call him Pud Nuts?
No, Podman. The question was...
This better be good. This better be good. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good one. What is your take on original sin for our species, on our consciousness?
Yeah. Boy, the impact of original sin has been one of the most hideous mind fucks that has ever been perpetrated on this species, you know. I'll tell you something about my relation to the goddess, which is Sophia, and to the retinue of infernal bitches and witches that breathe down my neck 24 hours a day. I love these feminine powers, and I have come to understand what they see in me and what they see in humanity. And one of the things that the goddess sees in us is innocence. You know, innocence is divinity. People wonder, people want to say, well, are we gods? Are we divine? Do we have divinity in us? Okay? But it's my understanding that the mystery school teachers did not teach that we are gods. That is a New Age exaggeration. They taught two things. One, that each human being, that our species is designed with a germ of divine intelligence called nous. Our intelligence, our intellect is divine. And I don't mean the cold, calculating intellect. I mean the intellect that has empathy in it. The intellect that's capable of joy, discovery, and empathy. That is a divine faculty. And in addition to that, we have our innocence. You know, I said that in the Gnostic teachings, they call us, the anthropos, that luminous child. What do you see when you look at a child, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old child? What do you see when you look at their brow? Don't you see a kind of radiance? That's the innocence of the human species, shining right out of the face of a child. And we all have that innocence. And the doctrine of original sin was an actual attempt, a terrorist attack through religious ideology to destroy our innocence, which is our basic divinity. And it was horrible. And anybody that buys into it, unfortunately, is going to go down a very sad route. It's a total lie. The truth is that our innocence is divine.
Thank you for that.
Would, for a person to be more conscious, would a nocturnal environment have more of an effect of consciousness than during daytime?
Yes, I do find that to be so, and it's a brilliant point for you to bring that up. Now, we've got to look at the stars. We've got to get back to the stars. We are from the stars. Not only are we not from the stars, we are from the place where the stars come from, not just from another star or another planetary system circling a star. We're from the wellspring of super alive organic light, the plasmic matrix and fountainhead of this galaxy, where all stars are born. That's where our species comes from. And so I spend a lot of time out at night, I can tell you that, and as you know, from my little introduction that you read, I've taught and studied all my life naked eye astronomy, observation of the sky, observation of the constellations. Now, in ancient times all around the world, navigation was by the stars. And so I'm conducting this little navigation experiment of the mothership by looking meticulously at what's happening with the stars right now. And there are amazing things happening, by the way. And I find, personally, of course, I have the privilege that I can do this. Not everyone can. If you're holding down a day job, it's a little difficult. If you live in a city or a place where you can't see the sky, it's difficult. But I find that being out at night, breathing the night air, looking at the sky, is really, really good for keeping me sober and for keeping me at a certain level of awareness.
You know, you might add something, you guys, because if you take a look at Alaska, they got like 6 months of darkness. Their crime rates are very low, and the people up there are supposed to be very, very lax, you know, well, let's use the term peaceful.
Well, you know, it's humbling, my friend. I tell you, after this conversation, I'm going to step out on my terrace. The Milky Way is going to be right over the house, like a fantastic arch, right over the house with a dark strip in the Milky Way, with Cygnus, the swan, flying in the direction of the galactic center, Jupiter rising over the eastern horizon. I can see Andromeda when I step out my door. And you know what that is? That is the most distant object visible to the naked eye. It's 2.2 million light years away, and you can see it by looking up in the sky. It's humbling. It puts you in your place, and yet it gives you a tremendous sense of belonging. We need to reconnect with the sky. And, you know, if the solar plasma eruptions and other things happening on this Earth knock down all our communication systems and they knock the lights out, what's the first place that we're going to notice? We're going to notice the night sky. And maybe we need to be taken back to the sky in order to be taken back to sanity. Possible. By the way, could I just add one short comment to that?
Sure.
It's about darkness.
Ooh.
You know, I am so sick and tired of hearing people talk about the dark powers and dark is evil and dark is sanity. Dark is absolutely gorgeous. I love the dark. Darkness is beautiful. Darkness is part of our nature. Dark and light is a divine marriage, is a divine union of forces. It's not darkness that's the problem, my friends. It's things done in darkness. It's secrecy. Darkness is not evil. There are no dark powers threatening humanity. What's threatening humanity is the evil, sick, perverted, pathological beings who do everything behind layers and layers of secrecy. You know, my word to them is if they want to destroy me and the rest of the human race with the fantasy of a master race ideology, then why don't they come out in the open and do it so we can have a fair fight? But they'll never do that because they're cowards. So just remember, it's not darkness, you know, that is evil. It is secrecy. Things that are done in a way that you can't see them. But darkness is sublime, and I embrace darkness.
I have always found that darkness always worked for me. I've always worked night shift. That is my peace. That is where I can find my inner sanctum, is during the night. I'm a night owl, always been a night owl. I don't like it. I find too much negativity during the day, and that's why I'm the queen of mean.
Yeah. Well, some of us think that way, yeah.
All right, back to you, 23.
I'm glad you brought up the darkness and the light, because I certainly believe we live in a dualistic universe, and there must be an opposite and equal reaction to every action. So there certainly must be one with the other, and I think you make some great points about that. The next question was from Animu, and her question was, have you read the Sophia Pistis by J.J. Hertak, and what's the difference he sees in his interpretations of the same manuscripts?
Okay, the Pistis Sophia is a Gnostic text that is not from the Nag Hammadi collection. So prior to the moment in 1945 when the Coptic Nag Hammadi texts were discovered, only three manuscripts existed in Coptic. And the Bus Codex, the Askew Codex, and one other. And one of them is called the Pistis Sophia. I think that's the Askew Codex. It is a long Gnostic treatise in the form of a dialogue between the so-called disciples of Jesus. But again, the Jesus is not necessarily the Jesus of the New Testament. So any scholar who tells you flat out that the Jesus referred to by the code letters IS are called the Master, or called Soter, S-O-T-E-R, which means Savior. Anyone who equates that character in Gnostic writings with Jesus of the New Testament, Jesus of St. Paul, is misleading you, and that is incorrect scholarship. So I don't know if Hertak does that or not, but I think Hertak has a strong Jewish Christian agenda, and I wouldn't be surprised if he spins it in that way. I don't find that much in the Pistis Sophia. It's a long piece of work. It's very repetitive. I like the way that Mary Magdalene shows up in it, and she, in fact, appears to be represented as a great teacher in her own right. And so it's kind of a channeling from Mary Magdalene in a way, you know. But it concerns very obscure metaphysical concepts that, at the end of the day, I haven't found that I can boil them down to much of anything. And so when I stand the Pistis Sophia against the Nag Hammadi materials, there's really no contest. It has a very, in my view, in my analysis, it has very little instructive or inspirational material in it.
Thank you for that. The next question was also from Animu, and she was wondering if you astral travel or practice out-of-body experiences.
I practice in-body experiences. And my practice is immersion in body, immersion in nature. Now, I have had out-of-the-body experiences. I've had them spontaneously throughout my life in previous years. I've also had lucid dreams. And these lucid dreams from the age of 4 were terrifically decisive. I'd like to say something about the Gnostics to get back to your original question. You asked me who the Gnostics were, and I gave you my best shot. But I'll tell you that the Gnostics themselves didn't call themselves Gnostics. They didn't use that term. In fact, the term Gnostikoi, which first appears in a treatise by Plato in 600, dating from about 400 BC, was actually taken up by the adversaries of the Gnostics, the early Christian fanatics and ideologues who hated the Gnostics, and they called them know-it-alls and wise-asses. And that's the way the term Gnostikoi was used. Oh, those Gnostikoi, they say they know it all. They say they know the origin of the universe. They say they know the origin of the human species. They say they know that. They say that our Father God, Jehovah, is a demented alien. They think they know it all. You know, and it was used as an insult. What the Gnostics actually called themselves was teleste. That is from the Greek word telos, T-E-L-O-S, meaning aim or purpose or objective. So if I say to you, I am a telestes, that's the singular. I am one who is aimed. I am aimed. The Gnostics were aimed. And what aims me is the vision story of the divine Sophia. And if I stay in that story and allow my life to be aimed, in that way, then I practice what I call telestic shamanism. You see, this is the neologism I'm introducing. If anybody gets anything out of my work, I hope they would understand that there is a practice called telestic shamanism. When I practice telestic shamanism, I stand, I keep my eyes open, I go into ecstatic trance using entheogenic plants on occasion, and I do everything in the body. Let me tell you, we live in an age where we're suffocated and crushed by technology. All this pollution of these cell phones, all this crap that we use to live with is garbage compared to your body. Your body and your senses is the highest technology that you will ever find. I use my technology, and I do not do out-of-the-body practice.
Well, that brings me to my next point here. Salvia has become very popular, and I know a lot of people that practice shamanism will smoke salvia in order to reach different levels of consciousness. And in a lot of places, salvia is legal. You can go to the store and purchase it. I myself have tried salvia, and it was not only the most frightening experience I've ever had in my life, but also the most amazing experience. Have you tried it? And if you have tried it, have you experienced something from the other side that you don't think you could experience without it?
Well, first of all, sure, to answer that question. But first of all, I'd like to ask you a question. What was your aim in trying salvia?
I wanted to reach my holy guardian angel. That was my purpose.
So you had a specific intention to reach your holy guardian angel.
Absolutely.
And did you succeed?
I think so.
Did you find the bottom of the Dorito bag?
The bottom of the Dorito bag. Yeah, I certainly did find the bottom of the Dorito bag. And I'll tell you, if you guys have seen Total Recall, the part where Arnold Schwarzenegger is trying to pass customs, and he's disguised as a chick, and then he starts saying 2 weeks, and his face starts to break down into different levels. That's what it's like. You will literally turn into the ground, and you will feel a part of the one, the singularity. It's very scary. At first, you can't move, you can't think. You're in with everything, and then as you're released and you realize what's going on, it's a very incredible experience. But it's also a very scary experience, and I wouldn't recommend it for anybody that isn't strong.
In the end, it proved to be a positive and a learning experience for you then.
Without a shadow of a doubt. The most amazing experiences that I've ever had in my life, I would say, have been on salvia, and they last about 6 minutes, so it's nothing that's going to last for hours at a time, thank goodness, because I don't think I could handle it for more than 6 to 10 minutes.
Right. Well, of course, there are many entheogens that the divine Earth Goddess has provided us with to heal us and restore us to sanity and bring us into the higher understanding of certain things that we cannot understand in a normal state. So we go into a non-ordinary reality. And these all need to be used with a lot of respect and in a right setting and everything. And it's also very particular to people. I think you've probably found that as well. Each person has their particular ally, as it were, as Don Juan said. The Datura inoxia might be your ally, and the peyote or the psilocybin mushroom might be my ally. You develop these relationships with these other species, because they really are other species. What you do when you smoke salvia or ingest magic mushrooms is you actually allow another species, an intelligent species, to go joyriding in your nervous system and in your brain. And if you do that ritualistically and with a purpose, then you can come away from it with a learning experience and so forth. I've tried salvia a few times. I haven't been really advised to my satisfaction on the proper way to take it. But in the few occasions that I've taken it, the results have been erratic. Once they were very erotic, which is pretty interesting. I took it with a friend. So I can't really report on it very much. It's not what I systematically use in my shamanic practices, but I know it is a very powerful teacher.
I appreciate that. And one of the last questions I wanted to ask you, John, was very important. How do we break away from this spell of evil and cast aside all this wickedness that's being dumped on us on a daily basis?
Well, your question is so important, and I just think about this every day now because I think we're in the end game of the archonic powers. We're coming around to the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and I'm feeling a really gruesome sense of foreboding about that. I am so fed up with being lied to and conned and hoaxed and jerked around, and I don't think I'm the only one on the planet who feels this way, you know? And to me, the most frustrating thing of all, and some of you out there may resonate to this, I don't mind having an enemy. I don't mind knowing that there's a group of people out there descended from the Zedek team of the Old Testament. I'm ready to take them on. The only trouble is they're absolute cowards and they never come out in the open, you know? This is the problem. The people who are fucking with life on this planet never come out in the open. They hide. They wear the mask of secrecy, and they hide behind deception and secrecy. You know, there's a motto: by the way of deception, we shall conquer. So, get back to your question. There's two things that I work on. I'm not going to sit here and tell anybody what we need to do, and I don't have the answers, but I can just tell you what I do. One, I stay in touch with the beauty of the story, the beauty of the earth, and the beauty of the wisdom goddess and the divine feminine. I stay in touch with the Shakti powers of the universe, and I pull together with people who have the same inspiration and the same motive. So I work on the beauty part of the experiment, on my own beauty, my genius, my innocence, and I hold those things in highest regard in myself and others. And I try to learn and be a faithful ally to the goddess. At the same time, I'm really seriously looking at what to do with predators. But there has to be a counter magic against the black magic of the predators. And I am devoted to finding what that magic is and practicing it.
Well, I'll tell you, good luck with that. I mean, that's a pretty big task to take on the powers that be and all of their minions. So, you know, John, we really appreciate so much you coming on here today and really giving us a different outlook on things. I know that my paradigm has shifted quite a bit since I heard you first several months ago, and it's taken me on a new path. And, you know, just want to say thanks again for coming out here. Would really love to talk to you again sometime, and I hope everything works out for you out there in Spain. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, John.
Yes, thank you very much, John.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I wish you all to learn what you need to learn and to have safe passage.
We'd like to thank our guest, Mr. John Lash, for sharing his insight behind mythology, astronomy, belief systems, and everything within meta-history. Again, you can find out more about John Lash and his website at metahistory.org.